Abortion rights found support at the ballot box in 7 states on Tuesday. Those 7 were Arizona, Missouri, Colorado, Maryland, Montana, New York, and Nevada. Those states expanded access where it was already legal, and some of them, Arizona and Missouri, lifted bans. Current protections will be strengthened in 5 other states. Those 5 are Colorado, Maryland, Montana, New York, and Nevada. Missouri became the first state where voters ended an abortion ban. First time that has happened since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade in 2022. Abortion became front and centre after that decision, the Dobbs decision, in June of 2022. Many analysts thought reproductive rights would be the deciding factor in the 2024 election.
Nebraska and South Dakota did not vote to loosen restrictions. Bans in those states will stay in place. And in Florida, abortion rights on the ballot fell short of passing, while 57% of voters supported a measure to expand abortion access up to the point of fetal viability, which is about 24 weeks. The amendment needed a 60% supermajority to pass. This leaves the Sunshine State's 6-week ban in place.
Now in Nevada, voters approved a measure to protect abortion rights. 63% of Nevadans voted in that direction. State law requires voters to approve ballot amendments twice in that state, so the measure will face another vote in 2026 before it is enshrined in the state's constitution. Okay, obviously a massively intimate, powerful issue. Again, the Liberal side prevailing in more states than the Conservative side. On the other hand, the issue of abortion rights not driving turnout for Kamala Harris in anything resembling the way that Democrats had hoped. In fact, I was looking at the exit polls for a piece that I wrote just this morning, and there is considerable evidence that the Democratic advantage with women voters was in fact smaller this time around than it was 4 years ago for Joe Biden. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I was not surprised to see that abortion was not as motivating of a factor. I mean, in 2022, this was just months after the Dobbs decision. People were scared about what would happen to abortions in their states. They didn't know that there were going to be ballot measures. They were worried that there was going to be some federal action taken on it, especially after Lindsey Graham, what a bonehead, warned them that there would be. Idiotic. But anyway, clearly they didn't buy Kamala's insistence that Trump was secretly in support of a national abortion ban. I think people see that Trump is not the most moral guy when it comes to his relationships and has a history of maybe running around a little bit.
That's very diplomatically put in.
Thank you. And they don't really buy that he is this hardline social conservative on the abortion issue. And for evangelical voters, he's sort of an imperfect vessel for them to accomplish some of their policy priorities, but they're happy with having abortion on the state level for the most part. Sure. Would they love a federal ban? Sure. They know that Trump's not going to give it to them. You didn't see any significant portion of the evangelical vote move away from Trump because of that. So, yeah, it just, and you look at the who people trusted more on abortion, and Kamala's advantage on that was pretty small. It was really only 5 or 6 percentage points, which I think suggests that as much as people don't want a federal ban, they also don't like the idea of unlimited abortion access, no restrictions up until the moment of birth, which is really the only policy position that we got out of Kamala because she refused to identify any meaningful restrictions on the procedure.
Yeah, so first of all, as regards Trump, I mean, in addition to the sometimes fairly colourful nature of his personal life, he's been all over the map during his life on where he stands on abortion. And before he was in politics, he was very, very pro-abortion rights, and then he has reversed that position. And finally, in this election campaign, he came to this position trying to, I think, neutralise the political damage from the topic. He came to the position he did on the idea of a national ban. I do think it's really interesting that the pro-choice or pro-abortion rights side is still capable of just racking up these victories, including in quite conservative states. So it does seem to me that public opinion is pretty firmly on, well, I don't know even if I would say the liberal side, but isn't on the side of the Supreme Court that struck down Roe versus Wade and just got rid of that guarantee. And so to me, the interesting political disconnect is why and how Kamala Harris was unable to capitalize on that. You've given some of those reasons, but I mean, if I was on election night, somehow sequestered, so the only piece of news I heard in the early hours of those results coming in was that Floridians had voted 57% to enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. I would think that that was presaging a pretty good night for Kamala Harris, and that didn't happen at all, even in Florida, which she lost by an overwhelming margin. So I do think that that apparent political disconnect is interesting and, from a Democratic perspective, worrisome.
Yeah, I would say part of the problem with some of these states is that they had outright bans that were triggered after Dobbs, whereas public opinion typically sits at about 15 weeks in terms of restrictions. And so they felt like those went too far. I talked to a voter from Florida on my way back from Michigan in the airport who said that him and his wife ultimately voted against the ballot measure because they felt like although 6 weeks was a little bit stricter than they would like, they thought 24 weeks was too much and that the measure was too extreme for them. So they'd rather have a more strict limit than opening it up to as far as the Democrats wanted. So I think it's less about people being so fervently excited about abortions than it is their states haven't quite got the exact limit that they would prefer. And so they're sort of erring on the side of, you know, for some people it's a little bit more than we would want maybe, for some it's a little bit less than we would want maybe, and there isn't like an exact number that all these people are voting on, right? Like it's a little bit different in every single state. And I think it's really incumbent on the pro-life movement, by the way, for them to start focusing on changing minds on the cultural question of this, creating a culture of life, so to speak. They've, for a long time, been so focused on overturning Roe v. Wade and the federal questions involved that maybe they haven't organized as well on the state level and haven't really had to do the hard work of actually convincing people to come over to their side during a direct Democratic vote, like the ones that we saw in these ballot measures. And I think that's why a lot of them were quite upset when Trump said that he wasn't going to go after a national ban, because it actually put the responsibility on them to do the hard work of convincing voters, which is obviously easier said than done. I also think that the Harris campaign knew that abortion wasn't going to be as motivating for them because of the way that their messaging changed on this issue, right? When we go back to previous years with the Democratic Party, it was always about abortion in the sense of young single women who have their whole lives ahead of them, or women who are raped or victims of incest. They changed things this time around in terms of the messaging to actually scaring women that they wouldn't be able to get miscarriage care or care for ectopic pregnancies in states like Texas or Florida because of the restrictions, and running with a lot of mothers, like women who were married, who already had kids, who needed some kind of pregnancy ending or way of getting fetal tissue out after a miscarriage as a means for keeping abortion legal up into the moment of birth. And I think a lot of women didn't really buy that, because women who have been through those procedures know that those aren't really abortions.
Yeah, and one of the really interesting things that we could talk about for much longer if we had time, which sadly we...
Yeah, sorry for running out the clock there. I had a lot to say.
No, I mean, I think that it's such an interesting issue because there's so many different components to it. But, you know, your point about changing the culture of people from an anti-abortion or pro-life position, trying to create the conditions to change the popular view on that. I suppose I just think that a lot of people do acknowledge on an individual basis that the question of abortion is a very, very complicated moral question. But to me, what that has led to has been a fair amount of stability in a plurality of voters not believing it's up to the state or the law or politicians to make that decision on behalf of individual women. So I understand that there are very many people who are opposed to abortion on moral grounds, and I don't agree with the argument, but I understand, I think, what the moral argument is. But there is some level of middle ground on this issue of people who just don't think it's up to politicians to decide that question. And I think that's why you see these state level measures that we're seeing.
But I wonder if that's because Roe was the status quo for so long that people just kind of accepted that there wasn't going to be any major change on the issue. And so they kind of maybe talked themselves into this idea that it wasn't for politicians to do, because obviously in other parts of the world, a 15-week ban, sometimes even earlier, is pretty common, right? And so it seems to be a uniquely American phenomenon that people feel like they should be hands off of the abortion question politically.
Just before we finish this up, Amber, one of the things I enjoy about our conversations is that I can get your insights into the conservative movement generally. Now that Trump is coming back to the White House, he has said what he said about a national abortion ban. But do you think, whether it's evangelicals or the pro-life movement, will put new pressure on for a federal ban?
They very well could, and it could be political strategy that they didn't do it more aggressively during the campaign, and maybe they will try to lobby him for that when he's in office. I don't think he would do it, to be honest with you. And again, I think it's a way to abdicate responsibility for having to actually change people's minds on the issue, is to put all of the onus on Trump, who would then be politically liable for it, for something that's very unpopular at the current moment. So we'll see what happens. But again, you didn't see evangelical voters abandon Trump over this, right? They were happy enough with the rest of his positions on religious liberty and things like that. I don't see him caving to that specific pressure from the pro-life movement.
Fair enough.
That's going to do it for us today on Rising, actually. So be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.